Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
A Time for Truth show is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome back to A Time for Truth show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, and it's a pleasure to be back with you again tonight. A lot of you have been asking, well, how do I get the previous episodes? I really want to see them all. And it's very simple, actually. You go on YouTube and you click on A Time for Truth show. A Time for Truth show with the A at the beginning. And you hit the subscribe button. We'll be very happy to have you as one of our members. And you will be availed of all the previous episodes over the last few years. So we welcome you. Now tonight, we have something very important because, you know, our world is beset by so much difficulty, and we don't really sometimes see beneath the layer into what really is going on. Not the apparency, but the actuality, and like why things don't seem to get better. So we're very lucky to have someone with us, very important tonight, that we're going to introduce you to. Her name is Dawn Martin. And if we can put her pictures up on the screen, Buddha, I want to give a little brief introduction of Manhattan-born Dawn Martin, who's the niece of the late Chief Dr. Annie B. Martin, and was raised in Harlem as one of the first women rap artists. You know, she's a friend of Dougie Fresh, and quite an entertaining lady. Dawn is a motivational speaker and a mentor. She's a member of the NAACP. She's co-chair of Housing Legal Redress. There you see her. She's like very innovative. And she's a member of education and many different health committees, holding a psychology degree from the College of New Rochelle, and a master's in mental health counseling and public administration. She's a care counselor for over 20 years for the Pinocchio School Catholic School, where she takes good care of those young kids. There you see her with the NAACP. She's also involved with various schools under the Board of Education, as well as in general working as a mental health caregiver, trying to maintain the sanity of our New York City population. She worked for CIS Counseling Center for Liberty for the 9/11 survivors, and is an ambassador in drug education for the Foundation for a Drug-Free World, the Americas chapter, recently participating in many Dominican Day parades across the metro New York area. An engineer, if you bring her up on the screen, I want to bid a warm welcome to Dawn Martin to a Time for Truth show. Welcome, Dawn.
Hi, how you doing, Doctor?
It's a pleasure to have you.
It's wonderful to be here.
Absolutely. You know, you're quite a diverse and prolific person.
Right. Well, it's all a contribution to the exact nature of a derivative of my family structure that you just got through speaking in reference of with a young lady from another state. Like, it's imperative that you understand that you have different abilities. And at a very young age, I had some family members that contribute to exactly telling me that I do have a lot of different attributes regardless of what society had stated.
Absolutely. You actually answered one of the questions I had. And so I was going to ask you, so how did you become, you know, one of the first women rap artists?
Well, simply as a young child, growing up in Harlem, there weren't too many things for us to do but block parties and different kind of community events. And one of the things that was parallel that helped me to be transparent towards looking at, I had not a lot of money. I was raised by my grandmother, Marguerite Viola Martin, and she made it where I always had something to do, whether it was at school, whether it was at camp, whether it was at the swimming pool across the street, adjacent from where we lived at 116th Street, Harlem World, was a 5 and dime Woolworths at the time. So I learned at a very young age how to get involved with the infrastructure of my community. Environmentally, that was the only thing that pulled us up out of what was going on in the circumference of where we lived at.
Makes total sense. And so now, tell me then, because you started to go and you went into education, right? And you've been in that for such a long period of time. Tell us how that happened.
Well, prerequisite to that, I got involved with things that weren't conducive towards my needs. And what happened was I had to go through the pitfalls of disaster, of degradation, dereliction, abandonment of oneself, but underlying issues that happen with most families and different multifaceted capacities. But in the year of 1993, I catapulted myself away from all derogatory things that occurred, such as alcoholism and hanging out with the wrong people, because I was involved in the music industry.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. You know, there's a lot of drugs and alcohol in the art, right?
Yes. That was what encapsulated the very essence of what they stated back in those days, that was all right. You know, have a little drink, you know, a little smoke of weed or whatever. And then it moved to other things. However, the epitome of underlying issues for the infrastructure of families, right? There was a lot of people that went through the same things that I did, but some never made it out, Doctor, unfortunately.
Interesting. Is that why you transitioned into mental health and public administration and counseling?
Yes, it was imperative. I lost my mother from a mental health overdose of drugs in the hospital as a child. And because she was slipped a Mickey in one of the after-hour spots. And so one of the things that was in correlation to me being a little rap artist and everything, I used to be in those kind of places until they allowed us to really get into the disco and stuff like that. And I had to be very mindful, but I wound up being around the same people that weren't appropriate. So I had a great aunt, a wonderful aunt, who helped catapult me out of the pitfalls of the disaster that I had made my life of, because I wanted to be, you know,
In the in
down.
crowd, right?
Yeah, the in crowd. The in crowd. And I always said, I'm not going to be like the bad side of my family. I'm going to be good. I ran Colgate, the woman's running. I got involved with the rap. Anything to get away from the infrastructure, the societal norms that was encapsulated in Harlem at that time, in the 60s and the 70s, that selling drugs and taking numbers and all those things were supposed to be like the limelight.
But it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
No, there's a lot of destruction, a lot of addiction. And you know, there's some things I want you to relay to the viewers, because you mentioned that with drugs, there's also a lot that happens within the community, and you were saying also within, you know, the African American community, and it's almost like you feel like it's like you're going like in a rat maze. You're just going running around, and that's why what's happening in the world. So tell us a little bit about your feelings about the reality of why these things keep occurring and how it keeps people in a box.
Well, my aunt, Chief Dr. Annie B. Martin, encapsulated some of the exact nature of what was going on back in those days, and some of the Rockefeller law just was appalling to the extent where it incarcerated people for astronomical amounts of time. And it didn't give them the recovery tools that they need in order to succeed when they're landed back into society as a norm. So it was imperative, right, that essential tools were created, right? However, to stop the pitfalls of disaster from happening with our family members in Harlem back in those days, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, Staten Island, it was all over. And it was because we went through war, so forth and so on, and people came back with a heroin addiction, you know.
From the Vietnam War?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so from there, then came the cocaine, then there came, you know, other illicit substances, you know, and in correlation to all of it, it was taught to be norm. You understand me? In the infrastructure of the community. This was the only way that you would be able to encapsulate living life on life's terms and financially having stability at that time, unless it was just welfare. And raising kids was a real hard thing for a mother to do with 4 and 5 children in middle schools ways to work. Like, for instance, my grandmother worked she sewed, like in the sewing factory. Then she also worked in the cotton club. She sung jazz, right? She also made bullets for the United States Army. And my grandpa was a wonderful vet, and he had the Blue Cross. And those things were wonderful. However, when you have to take care of 4 or 5 children, it takes a whole lot for a woman to have that responsibility, especially then when segregation was not, we were just at the forefront of everything. And they start to recognize that, look, there's a problem and we need to integrate people and we need to treat people appropriately. However, we still have a problematic issue. So the lie, the myth that drugs that help catapult you outside of the circumference of a poor, you know, place that we came from was something that became the norm in the infrastructure of our community. And so some of us were cataloged and labelized, and it became a problematic issue. And I may have fallen into the category because of what my father did, because of what my mother was around. However, my aunt was able to help me after going through some appalling atrocity.
Yeah, that, you know, makes a lot of sense. And then you're also saying that this vicious cycle, so here are these African American men, then they disappeared at a young age. but this is what was being touted in their neighborhood to be successful. And then they ended up in prison and working, to build things that the country needed, but they weren't really around, so that the mothers were home alone.
Right, and for minuscule amount of money. And this is where we get the mule system, and the whole thing is prolific. And it speaks in reference to the historical perspectives of why they keep certain populations incarcerated, and so a reflection upon that is the recidivism rate. And when you make marijuana legal all over again,
that's right,
and you put, other illicit chemicals in the vaping cigarette, and you make it seem as though it's all right, you're trying to encapsulate the very essence of our brand new generation of children. So it can be the episode of reoccurrence all over again. Unfortunately, and here we go with the recidivism rate, the homelessness, the joblessness, the mental health. Again, inundating the circumferences of our communities.
And, it's interesting, Dawn, you bring up a very interesting point, which makes a lot of sense, because, the fact that it's being legalized, yet it harms brain development from studies in the CDC, the NIH, showing that marijuana does that, and the vaping, and where, again, those same agencies have shown that the nicotine in those flavorings also affects the brain development. And so now what you were saying makes so much sense, because you're developing another generation that's going to not be able to learn properly, that's not going to be able to achieve their goals, that's going to be going down the wrong path instead of producing and creating. And then it makes a lot of sense in what you're saying, that it would just proliferate and just, again, continue and propagate what's been happening before. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes.
Amazing.
Along with mental health, something that I did in school is also substance abuse. And an imperative aspect of understanding what substance abuse is when people use mood-changing and mind-altering chemicals and they don't have the capacity to rationalize the exact nature of their wrong, moralistically, environmentally, which leads to dereliction, degradation, and near death most of the time. And if not in that order, it kind of slow walks them adjacent to what? Societal labelization, where they can't overcome the obstacle and still maintain and sustain appropriate way of life, appropriate way of living. And when you give that to children have no way of doing the fundamental developmental factors that we all have. They have the candy. They got marijuana, this and candy. It's so easy for predators to mark our children right now. We even got to put, the medication in the school system. Do you see something wrong with that? Because if they get an overdose, it has to be there, it has to be available. Why would a child be getting an overdose? Unless you're doing something wrong.
To begin with, you're saying. Right, so what you're saying is to take a look as a community of what we're allowing to happen, and that the legalization is leading to these problems, but what are we doing? Because now our future generation is never going to really make it.
Yeah.
But then I always wondered, because to me, when people said to me, well, this is going to be good for the economy. And what I always looked at is, well, how is that going to be good for the economy? Is that what you're saying?
No. If you can hypothesize that it would be good for the community, you have to look at good, bad, and indifferent about the situation at hand. So reflectively, if we look from generation to generation, historically, that's the most appalling, outrageous sort of nonsense to even think that you're going to encapsulate financial governance from what? Selling mood-changing and mind-altering chemicals to people that are not suspected of how it can become an immoral and deplorable scenario at hand that could lead to their ultimate demise. Not anything is, we could say is transcendent. Oh, they're gonna do a little, medicinal use. Some kids need a little something. You understand me? To calm them down, and we can give them this instead of the Ritalin, right? Stop. Okay, it's not the first train that hits you dead. When the first train hits you, you're dead. Okay? So once you give them just a little bit, and they already have a predisposed generic aspect of it, you already had a grandma or a grandpa or a father or a mother that used drugs, and you go to try marijuana for what? What kind of use they say? What they call it? Recreational use. Huh? Do you know that you're letting the cat out of the bag? And Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde can destroy, conquer, and divide the infrastructure of the family just because of minute use? So now, are you going to get more money doing this, or is it going to lead to more problems? Look at the problem. Oh my God, demoralizing traffic issues that have been occurring since they let the marijuana legal. Then people are coming to work hard. Hey, come on, at what point are you going to make a differentiation of what's appropriate, what's not? What could lead us to more horrifying, atrocious kind of scenarios at hand, reflecting upon the contingency of people, just being, first of all, medically unable of adhering to their responsibility to take care of themselves, because once they smoke the marijuana, they don't want to do anything.
That's right.
Okay?
Well, they want to get high. They're not going to be producing.
Yeah.
But it goes against any basic economics. But the other thing that I think is not correct is we're looking at economics, but we don't look at what are we doing to these people? What are we doing? And these are not people, but this is young people. This is a youth, the future of the world. Their intelligence is going to go down. And then really it's very interesting what you said, because I never really looked at it. But then when you have that, let's say in the African American culture, or maybe in some other low-income area, what's going to happen, it's almost like you say, well, they shouldn't do it, but it's almost like they're coerced to do it because they don't see a way out, right?
Right.
That's the way. They think that's the way out, and then what ends up happening is all these things we complain about, though, like what you said, the homelessness, the violence, the fact that they're going in circles, they're not getting educated, and then you go, well, how is that good for our city?
The complete mental health disparities.
Right.
With clarity and sincerity, if you see these things constantly happening at a rapid pace in the infrastructure of their community, right? We could be humanistically appropriate about it. However, we have to also know that even though the red tape bureaucracy will be the issue at hand at large to deal with, we have to change some of the trajectory of what? The legislative order that's coming down, right? And stop the atrocity from occurring before it gets to the extent where there's no way that we can find more leverage and we lose more people. Look at statistical measures on how, what's killing people right now.
Tell me.
No. Well, they're using crack cocaine again. Dope is high again. Right? But what?
Sure, fentanyl.
Yeah, fentanyl and pills, they're killing people. You understand me? And it's also killing the elderly population that's in a nursing home.
It's true. You know what? Sometimes people think it's only the young, but it's also the elderly, and that's really sad. I wanted to bring up a topic that you've been doing, because you work with Phil Rucker, who is the son, the man who established, the founder of that Rucker Park and the Rucker League, and so many famous NBA players like Dr. J, the Globetrotter was a friend of yours and I, Robert Hunter, so many other basketball greats that came out of Rucker Park. And recently, I think you were with him at they had like a basketball tournament, right? Mm-hmm. And you were there with Drug Free World. Yes. And tell us a little bit about that, because that's like an option, right?
So what they do is they always have the wonderful games there. And what happens is they encapsulate the infrastructure of the different communities that's in the surrounding areas and even abroad when they bring the game. And sometimes old stars come and the children gravitate towards them. They understand the exact nature. They have the ability to not only play the game, but to get accolades by going to school and doing things appropriately so they can make the grade, right. So they can be a star and own their own team at some point in some time. Or they can go on to own their own businesses and still play the game, have fun, and win. But winning of the mind is the most important thing. Sure. And that's what I love about Phil.
That makes so much sense. It's like discipline, a game. Because life really, when you look at it, you're going to fall. But why do you keep playing basketball? Because you want to play that game. Right. So it gives them a different perspective on life. You don't take a drug every time you fall on a basketball court or football because you want to play. Right. So, I thought that was very interesting what you were doing with him. Mm-hmm. And I know Bobby Hunter, he goes around the whole country doing events like that with sports. Yeah. With drug education, with mentoring these kids. Right. And, we're getting toward the end of the show. Mm-hmm. And, I want to ask you something. What would you like to see happen in our country? What do you think is important? We've got, 1 minute left. What would you like to tell the viewers out here as your concluding statement? This is what we need to do to change this around.
We need more humanistic understanding of unity. And we need to build an intervention and prevention forefront for the different dynamics of mood-changing and mind-altering chemicals that encapsulate some of how we're going to financially meet the exact nature of how we're going to turn things around in our wonderful world that we're living in. But there's other ways to do it without ruining people's lives and families. And so as a whole country as a whole, in different multifaceted capacities, we need to adhere to our humanistic responsibility to mankind and don't be blinded by the finances on which we think about all the time. We'll never be without money, but we will be without people that can help us to gain the sustainability that we need to keep America free. Without you, there is no me. That's why I do with the children, MMCC, with the rap therapy. That's imperative. That's very important. And over 20 years, I worked as a mental health counselor, as a substance abuse counselor, a rap artist, motivational speaker. But most of all, it's best to be a humanitarian, which I am. A Chance to Choose is a song that I created for not only women's rights, but the chance to choose for our children and for human beings all over the world. Thanks.
Well, you know what, Dawn Martin? I love what you said. It makes a lot of sense. For those of you watching, let's take her words to heart and let's move forward. Let's do sports. Let's do dance. Let's do singing. Let's be creative. Let's teach our kids a different way. Let's have a better economy. Where not only do we have a good economy, but we have an economy of people that are going to live long. They're not going to end up in the hospital, a mental health ward. And like Dawn said, we're not going to need to have drugs in the school because they have mental problems that we're creating by the very legalization of what we're doing. Dawn, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doctor, and keep the good work up.
Well, thank you. And for those of you watching, as Dawn Martin said, drug-free world, family structure, people. Let's have a wealth of people, happy, healthy people. Until the next episode of the Time for Truth show, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
This show was sponsored by A Time for Truth Foundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet